He stood on a chair like some half-baked revolutionary, one hand raised, the other gripping a cold brew he probably didn't even like. "I'm in charge now," he declared, loud enough to make the forks pause midair. "And starting today, we clean house. Dead weight goes first." Then his finger found me. "You," he said, smirking. "Kelly, you're out. Hand over everything. Keys, badge, laptop." Effective immediately. Laughter rippled through the cafeteria. Awkward, unsure, the kind that smells like fear. Half the office stared at their trays. The other half waited to see if I'd cry. I didn't. 11 years of service, 37 projects, 3 restructures. I'd survived them all. And now this boy, my late boss's son, thought humiliating me was how you lead. He had his father's eyes, but none of his spine. I stood slowly, the chair scraping against the floor like a warning. My coffee was still warm. I took one last sip, savoring it, because when everything collapses, it's always over something small and simple. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a small ring of keys. 6 in total, dull silver, nothing special. Except they were. They were the company's skeleton keys. Digital access tokens, server rooms, legal archives, physical storage. My boss, the real one, his father had once said, "You're the last line of defense, Kelly. If anything ever happens, these will keep us standing." I held them up, and the room fell quiet. "Good luck," I said, then placed them gently in the new CEO's hand. His grin widened like he'd just conquered Rome. "That'll do," he said, waving me off. "Security will escort you out." Security didn't move. I walked out myself, past the gawking interns, past the motivational poster that read "Integrity First." I didn't look back, not once. If I had, they would have seen the smile I was trying to hide. Outside, the air tasted like metal and freedom. I sat in my car for a long while, listening to the hum of the parking lot lights, keys no longer clinking in my bag. My hands were trembling, not with fear, but release. He thought those keys were symbols of control. What he didn't know was that they were control. Not because they opened doors, but because they authenticated systems. Mine. His father had trusted me with operational custody, compliance filings, infrastructure renewals, system access. My name was on the paperwork, not his, not HR's, mine. By firing me without due process, he'd pulled a plug he didn't even know existed. But here's the thing. When someone humiliates you in public, when they make a show of your downfall, the instinct is to strike back fast. I didn't. That's the part people never expect. I didn't yell, didn't send an email, didn't post a cryptic LinkedIn status about new opportunities. I just waited. You don't destroy an empire by swinging. You let it rot from the inside, quietly as it forgets who kept the lights on. By 2 p.m., I was at a diner a few blocks away, staring into a mug of burnt coffee. My phone buzzed. 3 missed calls from the office, 1 from the facilities manager, 2 from IT. I ignored them. Then a text came through from Julia, the office administrator. "What did you do, Kelly?" "The badge readers are down. No one can get into the building. IT says all system authorizations expired this morning under your credentials." I read it twice. Smiled. Took another sip. Because that's what he never understood. Companies don't run on titles. They run on people like me. The quiet ones who remember the logins, who file the compliance renewals, who know that servers don't reboot themselves. And when you fire the person who holds the keys, the system doesn't revolt. It just stops obeying. I paid the bill, left a tip, and walked out into the crisp afternoon air. Across the street, I could already picture it. Employees locked outside, phones buzzing, panic spreading like wildfire. Somewhere in that glass tower, the new boss was probably shouting orders no one could execute. He thought firing me made him powerful. But power doesn't come from standing on a cafeteria table. It comes from the quiet knowledge that every structure, every login, every signature has a backbone, and that backbone just walked away. As I got into my car, another text arrived. This one from Thomas, the company lawyer. Kelly, please tell me this is a misunderstanding. Did you really hand him the master keys? The legal ones? I could almost hear his voice cracking through the words. I typed back, he asked for all company property. I complied. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, a message. Oh my God. You did what? I put the phone down and started the engine. The hum of the motor filled the silence. For the first time in 11 years, I wasn't responsible for saving anyone else's mess. The keys were gone. The locks were still mine. And the story, well, it was just beginning. By morning, my phone looked like a crime scene. 18 missed calls, 9 voicemails, 5 texts from unknown numbers. The first voicemail was Julia again. Kelly, please, just call me back. No one can access the payroll system. The CFO's losing it. IT says your credentials are still listed as primary authorization. We can't even print badges. The second was Thomas, the company lawyer. He sounded less like the calm, confident man who used to quote policy and more like someone trying to defuse a bomb. Kelly, I don't know what happened yesterday, but if you gave him the physical keys, those were, well, they were part of a legally bound compliance framework. We need to talk. I deleted the rest. I already knew what they'd say. Panic had started knocking. I brewed coffee, fed my cat, and sat by the window as the world outside turned gold with sunrise. I should have felt guilty, but I didn't break anything. They did. I had always been the patch, the fix, the one who caught what everyone else ignored. Without the patch, the cracks were just finally showing. By 9 a.m., my old team couldn't even access their emails. A friend from facilities texted me. They're locked out. Entire East Wing. Even the delivery trucks can't unload 10 minutes later. Spencer's pacing the lobby. He's saying you sabotaged us. Is that true? I typed back, no sabotage. Just policy. He didn't reply. At 9:47, Thomas finally reached me. Kelly, he said, voice taut. You understand what those keys represented, right? I do, I said, sipping my coffee. He sighed, a long exhale that sounded like regret. Then you know firing you publicly without documentation means the custodial authority never transitioned. You're still listed as the company's compliance custodian on federal filings. That means, I finished for him. Any action taken under those systems since yesterday is technically unauthorized. He was silent, then a whisper. Jesus Christ. I didn't say anything. Look, he said finally, I need you to come in. Help us fix this before the board finds out. I don't work there anymore, Thomas. Your new CEO made that clear. This isn't about pride, Kelly. This is about liability. I handed him the keys, I said. He wanted control. He's got it. The line went quiet. I could almost hear the moment he realized what that meant. Around noon, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Clara, the HR manager who'd been too afraid to meet my eyes during the firing. They're saying you locked us out on purpose. The founder's son called an emergency meeting. Legal's furious. Half the systems are down, and Spencer keeps yelling, just reset it. He doesn't understand nothing can be reset without your verification. I stared at the screen, shaking my head. This wasn't revenge. It was negligence catching up. You can't run a company like a playground and expect the swings not to fall apart. Still, I couldn't help picturing it. The son, standing in his designer suit, shouting orders to engineers who couldn't even log into their dashboards. Power without knowledge is just noise. By 1 p.m., the damage had spread. The vendor portal locked due to expired credentials. The badge system flagged an unauthorized custodian alert. Payroll froze automatically to prevent fraud. And all of it, every jammed door, every rejected login, traced back to one missing name. Mine. The boardroom must have been chaos. Later, I'd learned that Thomas stormed in mid-meeting, waving a stack of compliance reports and yelling, "You fired the custodian." But that would come later. For now, I sat in my apartment surrounded by 11 years of memories. Conference badges, framed project awards, the engraved pen the founder once gave me. He'd trusted me, taught me that real leadership wasn't about making noise. It was about making things work. His son never learned that. I opened my laptop, half expecting an angry email or a legal threat. Instead, there was one unread message in my personal inbox. From Dana, COO of a rival firm I'd met at an industry conference 3 years back. Heard about what happened. We've been trying to understand how your old company ran so smoothly. Maybe now's the time to talk? I didn't respond yet, but something in me stirred. The part that remembered what it felt like to build something without being stepped on. At 3 p.m., another message came, this one short and frantic. "Kelly, the board wants answers. Spencer told them you refused to cooperate. Thomas just yelled in front of everyone. He said, 'You did what?' 'You fired the legal custodian.'" I stared at that line for a long time. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was inevitability. The kind that comes after years of being underestimated. They'd built their castle on paperwork I had signed, and yesterday they'd torn out the cornerstone. When the sun started to set, I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. My cat jumped into my lap purring, oblivious to the fact that somewhere downtown, a young man's empire was unraveling by the minute. I whispered to her, "Funny thing about power, huh? It only works if you know where the switches are." And in that quiet apartment, with my phone still buzzing in the distance, I realized something. For the first time in over a decade, I didn't owe them a single fix. By the next morning, every major department was in crisis mode. Payroll couldn't run. Vendors couldn't deliver. The IT servers rejected admin logins like they were counterfeit coins. And in the center of it all sat Spencer, the new CEO, with a blank look that said he was finally realizing leadership wasn't about giving speeches. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but I heard everything through a friend who worked in finance. Marcus. He'd always been good at staying invisible, which meant people forgot he was in the room. According to him, it started at 8:32 a.m. sharp. The boardroom was packed. Legal, HR, finance, and operations. Everyone except me. Spencer strutted in late, still wearing that same expensive suit from the day before, though it looked less tailored now, rumpled from a night without sleep. He tossed his phone on the table and said, "All right, let's sort this out. Someone just reset the systems or whatever." The lawyer, Thomas, didn't even sit down. He slammed a folder onto the table. "You can't just reset the systems," he snapped. "You fired Kelly without offboarding her. She was the registered compliance custodian, the one person legally authorized to manage infrastructure access and vendor credentials." Spencer frowned. "She was just an operations manager." "No," Thomas said, voice rising. "She was the operations manager, facilities lead, and legal custodian of record. She's listed on every federal compliance document your father signed. Her digital signature validates your internal contracts." The CFO looked pale. "Are you saying the systems are locked because, what, she's gone?" Thomas nodded. "Exactly that." There was a long silence, the kind that stretches until it feels like gravity's been turned off. Then Spencer scoffed. "Fine. We'll just update the filings. Make Bryce the new custodian or something, Bryce. The IT guy who once thought VPN meant video party network. Shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That's not how it works," he muttered. "Those credentials are cryptographically bound. You need her biometric verification or an official offboarding certificate. We don't have either." That's when Thomas exploded. "You did what? You fired her publicly, without HR present, without paperwork, without a transition form? Are you insane?" Marcus told me the whole room froze. Even HR looked like they'd swallowed glass. Spencer tried to recover, fumbling for authority. She was dead weight. I was making a statement. My father always said leadership requires decisive action. Thomas leaned forward, face red. Your father also said leadership requires intelligence. You've just made this company non-compliant with half our vendors and in breach of at least 4 government contracts. The COO rubbed her temples. We can't process payroll. The vendor accounts are frozen, and the building lease still lists her as the transition authority. This isn't just bad optics. It's structural failure. Spencer's voice cracked. You're overreacting. We'll call her, bring her back for an hour, whatever it takes. She's not coming back, Thomas said flatly. You humiliated her in front of the entire staff. She has no obligation to save you now. Meanwhile, I was sitting at a quiet cafe a few blocks away, nursing a latte and pretending not to scroll through the flood of messages from my old colleagues. They're losing it. Spencer's father's been looped in. Legal says half our compliance data is frozen until your credentials transfer. I typed one reply. Tell Thomas I didn't break a thing. The system's just following protocol. Because that was the truth. I hadn't sabotaged them. I'd built those systems with one rule. No one gets power without accountability. It wasn't revenge. It was architecture. Back in the boardroom, things only got worse. The founder's name popped up on the video screen. Face tired, eyes sharp. He was supposed to be in Europe on sabbatical. Explain, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Spencer tried. Dad, listen. She was slowing things down. I'm trying to modernize. She didn't fit the culture anymore. The founder's jaw clenched. And you fired her publicly? Yes, but without offboarding? HR was going to handle. They didn't. Silence again. Then the founder said something Marcus swore chilled everyone in the room. You fired the foundation. You thought she was furniture, but she was the wiring in the walls. And now the lights are out. By afternoon, Spencer's reign had turned into survival mode. The internal chat logs leaked into my inbox. Payroll pending authorization. Vendor access expired. System administrator not recognized. And one message from Thomas to all executives written in plain language. Until Kelly Sharp is properly offboarded, this company is non-operational. Period. I stared at that line for a long time. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was a quiet kind of justice. The kind that doesn't need revenge to sting. Because when you build something right, even chaos follows the rules. By the next morning, the story had spread beyond the office walls. Word travels fast when chaos has a headline. Founder's son crashes company in 48 hours wasn't trending on social media yet. But it was floating around in group chats, investor circles, and quiet breakfast meetings between people who mattered. I woke up to 3 missed calls from an unfamiliar number and 1 short voicemail. Hi, Kelly. This is Dana Holt from Ellison Partners. We met at the Sustainability Summit a few years back. I heard about your situation. Would you be open to a conversation? No strings, just coffee. Her tone wasn't pitying. It was respectful. I remembered Dana. Sharp mind, no ego. The kind of executive who saw through noise. I texted back, sure, noon at Brookfield Cafe. By 11:50, I was sitting at the corner table, the same one I'd used for working lunches when I still wore my company badge. She arrived on time. Sleek black blazer, hair pulled back, phone off. That alone told me she meant business. Kelly Sharp, she said, shaking my hand. You caused quite the stir. I smiled faintly. I didn't cause anything. I just left. That's what makes it fascinating. She leaned in. You didn't blow anything up, yet the building's still on fire. That takes precision. I built systems, I said quietly. They just forgot how to respect them. She nodded, sipping her coffee. Ellison's been struggling with infrastructure compliance since our expansion. I need someone who knows how to build frameworks that don't fall apart when egos take over. I raised an eyebrow. You offering me a job? Consulting first, she said. You'll have autonomy, Full authority over your department and a contract that protects you from corporate politics. We'll pay you what you're worth. And more importantly, you'll be respected. For a moment, I just stared at her. After everything, the word respected hit harder than the salary. I'll think about it, I said. Dana smiled knowingly. You already have. That afternoon, I walked home through the downtown streets. The air felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing anywhere. My phone buzzed again. This time from Marcus. You need to see this. Attached was a screenshot of an internal company memo accidentally forwarded to a few too many people. Subject: Emergency Board Review. Custodial Transition. Required body: all financial and legal operations remain suspended pending resolution with former custodian Kelly Sharp. Immediate reinstatement recommended by legal. I read it twice. The word reinstatement made me laugh out loud right there on the sidewalk. They weren't trying to save me. They were trying to save themselves. At 4:30 p.m., Thomas called again. His voice was exhausted, worn down by too many meetings and too little progress. Kelly, listen, he said. The board met this morning. The founder's back. Spencer's on thin ice, and they're asking me to contact you formally. Formally? I repeated. That's a change. They want to resolve this cleanly. We can compensate you for your time if you come in, transfer the credentials, and sign a transition notice. They'll even issue an apology. I let the silence hang for a beat. Thomas, I'm not angry. But I'm not going back to clean up a mess I didn't make. He hesitated. Kelly, please. The company's days from collapse. Payroll, contracts, everything's... What happens when you fire the person who holds the foundation? I finished softly. There was a pause. Then, almost a whisper. He's not ready to lead. We all know that now. I told him that once, I said. He laughed. Thomas sighed. If you ever change your mind, the board will take your call. I won't, I said. But I appreciate that they finally understand what my job was worth. That night, I drafted my reply to Dana. Short, clear. I'm in. Let's build something that doesn't need saving. She replied within minutes. Welcome aboard. Orientation Monday. We'll have your office ready. I sat back in my chair, staring at the glow of the city through my window. The skyline looked different now. Still ruthless, but honest about it. For the first time in years, I wasn't just part of someone else's empire. I was about to build my own. Before heading to bed, I checked my messages one last time. The last unread one was from an unknown number. This is Spencer. We need to talk. I stared at it for a long time, then hit delete. Because some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived. And his education was just beginning. By Monday morning, the fallout had reached the press. Not the front page, yet. But industry blogs were circling like vultures. Words like compliance breach and vendor suspension started appearing next to the company's name. And that was before the founder called an emergency meeting. I didn't attend it, of course, but Thomas later told me everything. The founder arrived unannounced, straight from the airport. No bodyguards? No entourage. Just a man with decades of experience and a face that had seen too many mistakes to pretend anymore. He walked into the glass conference room, dropped his coat on the table, and said quietly, "Tell me it's not as bad as it looks." No one answered. Spencer was there too. Pale, sleepless, and cornered. His usual bravado had drained out, replaced by the twitchy panic of someone who'd run out of stories to tell. He tried to start with a presentation. Charts, projections, excuses, but the founder cut him off. "Save it," he said. "I want to know how you managed to turn a stable company into a legal disaster in less than a week." Spencer stammered, "Dad, she set me up." Kelly knew exactly what those keys were, for Thomas snapped. "She didn't set you up, Spencer. She did her job. You're the one who fired her without protocol. You humiliated the only person who understood how this place worked." The founder leaned back, arms crossed. You fired the custodian? Yes, Thomas said, and didn't file the paperwork. Which means every contract, every vendor agreement, every infrastructure system is legally frozen until we can complete a verified transition. And can we? Thomas shook his head. Not without her authorization. Silence filled the room. Then the founder said, almost to himself, "You fired the foundation." Meanwhile, I was in my new office across town. Temporary, modest, but mine. Dana had insisted on getting me started immediately. "Let's make sure we're ready when the phones start ringing," she'd said. She wasn't wrong. By noon, 3 clients from my old company had already reached out quietly, asking if I'd consider consulting for them instead. They didn't want drama. They wanted stability, something I'd always given them long before anyone noticed. I was reading through the first proposal when my phone rang again. Thomas. "Kelly," he said, voice low. "It's happening right now." "The founder's in the room. Spencer's trying to blame you?" I sighed. He's always needed someone else to take the fall. "He's running out of people," Thomas said. "The founder just asked to see the original lease. Guess whose name is still on it as transition authority?" I smiled faintly. "Let me guess." "Yours," he confirmed. And when he saw it, he turned white. He asked Spencer if he even knew what that clause meant. Spencer said, "It's just a signature." The founder nearly lost it. I pictured the scene. Spencer shrinking in his chair while the man who built the company realized his own son had gutted it through arrogance. "What happens now?" I asked. "The founder's done protecting him." "They're calling an emergency board vote this afternoon by 3 p.m. A message popped into my inbox. Subject: Leadership Transition Announcement. Body: effective immediately, Spencer Rowe has resigned from his position as CEO. Interim leadership will be overseen by the founder until further notice. No explanations, no apology. Just a quiet surrender typed in corporate language. I stared at the email for a while. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. It wasn't victory. It was validation. Proof that decency and diligence still had weight in a world obsessed with speed and ego. I closed the laptop and went to the window. Across the street, the company building looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. The once bustling lobby was half empty, a few employees trickling out carrying boxes. The empire had crumbled, not with fire, but with silence. That evening, I met Dana at a rooftop bar to celebrate the first official contract under my new firm. She raised her glass. "To clean exits and fresh starts," she said. I clinked mine against hers. "And to people who read what they sign." She laughed. "So, what now?" "Now," I said, "we build something sustainable. No shouting in cafeterias, no trust fund revolutions, just real work." My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I ignored it, but the voicemail that followed played automatically. It was Spencer. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Kelly, I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought I was proving something. Please, can we talk?" I deleted it. Some lessons are earned the hard way, and his tuition had already been paid in full. When I got home, I placed my old keyring on the kitchen table, the same one I'd handed him that day. The metal caught the light, dull but still solid, proof that sometimes the smallest things carry the most weight. I thought of the founder, of Thomas, of every person who'd watched and stayed silent while arrogance took over. Maybe now they'd remember that titles don't make you powerful. Responsibility does. The world outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm. I poured a glass of wine, raised it toward the window, and whispered, "Here's to the ones who keep the lights on." Because in the end, revenge wasn't the goal. It never was. It was about being seen. And now, finally, they saw. You're lucky I'm not firing you. Jason sneered across the mahogany conference table, sliding the demotion letter toward me. You'll keep your badge, but from now on, you'll be working in the basement with the audit interns. His grin was the kind of smug expression I'd seen on men who thought power was permanent. The HR director, Claire, avoided my eyes. The company lawyer, Mitchell, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I looked down at the letter. Performance and compliance reassignment due to behavioral misalignment. Corporate poetry for we're burying you alive. Then I laughed, quietly at first, then louder. Jason's grin faltered. Something funny, Amanda? Perfect, I said, pushing my chair back slowly. Because the second you signed that letter, you just triggered my payout clause. The room froze. Mitchell frowned. What payout clause? I reached into my leather portfolio and placed a cream envelope on the table. It looked ordinary, until they saw the embossed seal from Westlake Trust Services, our M&A escrow partner. The notarized integrity clause, I said calmly. Signed in 2018 by then CEO Robert Klein, approved by the board's compensation committee, and filed under the original merger agreement. A demotion following a verified fraud report constitutes an integrity retaliation event. Jason scoffed. You're bluffing. Really? I tapped my phone screen. Let's find out. I hit speaker. A man's voice answered. Westlake Trust Services, Fiduciary Division. This is Robert speaking. Hi, Robert. This is Amanda Lewis. Account verification 9423. Please confirm the trigger conditions for the Integrity Performance Clause linked to Apex Systems Compliance Pool. There was a brief pause, then the clatter of keys. One moment. Yes, I see the account. The trigger event was verified this morning. Upon confirmation of adverse employment action, a payout of $120 million will be released from the compliance incentive pool. Jason's face drained of color. Wait, what? That's not possible, Mitchell stammered. Please confirm, I said. Under Section 7.3, an employee demoted or terminated in retaliation for reporting regulatory fraud exceeding $10 million qualifies as a constructive termination event. The escrow funds are outside company control. The release is automatic silence. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then Jason exploded. Cancel that transaction immediately. I'm sorry, sir, the banker replied. These are irrevocable instructions signed 5 years ago. The funds will transfer within 1 business day. I ended the call and leaned back. You were saying, Jason? His lips moved, but no sound came out. Claire's pen fell from her hand. Mitchell looked like he wanted to melt into the carpet. I didn't gloat. Not yet. I just folded my hands. You really should have read the merger documents before trying to humiliate me. I'm Amanda Lewis, 41 years old, senior compliance analyst at Apex Systems, or at least I was until 10 minutes ago. When I joined the company back in 2017, Apex was merging with an aerospace firm twice its size. Everyone was scrambling: legal, finance, HR. That chaos was my playground. See, before Apex, I spent 8 years at a defense contractor's audit division. My job was to detect procurement fraud, shell vendors, and insider kickback schemes. The first thing they teach you in that world is prepare for betrayal. The second thing is protect yourself in writing. So, when I joined Apex during the merger, I negotiated a clause. If I ever filed a verified integrity report exposing major financial violations and the company retaliated against me instead of investigating, I'd receive a payout from the compliance reserve pool. That pool was worth $120 million, money set aside to cover penalties from potential fraud exposure. I didn't think I'd ever need it, until 3 months ago. It started small, a few odd invoices tied to vendor optimization consulting. But the amounts didn't make sense. $840,000 per month to a Delaware LLC with no employees. The authorizations? Always signed by our CFO, Patricia Hale. I'd seen that pattern before. Fake vendors, shell companies, falsified cost centers. The kind of scheme that drains millions right under everyone's nose. So I did my job. I followed the paper trail. Over 8 weeks, I uncovered $47.6 million in fraudulent payments routed through 3 ghost vendors. Patricia had built her own golden pipeline. I submitted a detailed integrity report, 62 pages with financial flowcharts and verified bank statements. I expected an internal audit, maybe even quiet gratitude. Instead, Jason, her right-hand man, called me into his office 2 days later. "Amanda, you've been disruptive," he said. "You're not a team player. We need people who build trust, not suspicion." I'd been through enough corporate battles to recognize what was coming. The silent treatment from colleagues, the calendar invitations disappearing, the locked database folders, HR calling performance check-ins, classic retaliation choreography. So I waited, documented everything, every revoked access request, every email marked returned undeliverable, every meeting I was accidentally excluded from. And today, November 12th, 10 a.m., they made their move. The official demotion, the trigger. Jason was still staring at the table when I stood. "You wanted me gone," I said softly. "You should have fired me." "But you didn't. You demoted me. And that's what cost you $120 million. He lunged forward. "You planned this." "No," I said, gathering my papers. "You did." I turned toward the door, my pulse steady. 6 years of preparation, of quiet patience, had just detonated in the center of the company's power structure. As I walked out, I could hear Mitchell whispering, "Did she really just—" I smiled. Yes, I really did. And the funny part? The $120 million wasn't even the endgame. That was just phase 1. When people ask how I managed to pull off a $120 million payout, I tell them the truth. It didn't start as revenge. It started as survival. Back in 2018, Apex Systems was a mess. The merger with Lauren Aerospace had doubled our contracts, but also doubled our corruption. I was 35 then, newly promoted, still naive enough to think doing the right thing mattered. During those months, I worked 14-hour days reviewing supplier integrations and cost structure reports that made no sense. Numbers that never added up, invoices without work orders, strategic partners who didn't exist outside of spreadsheets. I remember confronting my then-manager, Tom Reynolds. "These vendor authorizations don't follow Pentagon compliance codes," I told him. He just smiled and said, "Amanda, it's merger chaos. Don't look too closely." That sentence stayed with me for years, so I started documenting everything. Not because I was paranoid, but because I'd seen good people destroyed for less. I had a mentor back then, a quiet man named Edward Grant, former Air Force intelligence turned auditor. He once told me, "Never fight corruption empty-handed. Paperwork wins wars." That's when the idea of the clause began. During the merger, Apex and Lauren were creating a compliance incentive fund, $120 million set aside to encourage ethical reporting. The lawyers wanted to make it look good for regulators. I just saw a shield waiting to be forged. While HR and legal were drowning in integration documents, I drafted a small addition to my employment contract. A protection clause stating that if I reported verified financial misconduct and experienced retaliation before an investigation concluded, I'd receive an accelerated payout from that compliance pool. It sounded harmless. Corporate theater for integrity. The clause needed only 2 signatures: the outgoing CEO, Robert Klein, and the Compensation Committee Chair, Evelyn Dorsey. Robert was signing hundreds of merger papers a day. Evelyn was retiring in 3 weeks. Both signed without a question. I filed the notarized copy with Westlake Trust Services, our merger escrow bank, and sent a sealed duplicate to my attorney in Seattle. Then I locked the original in a safe deposit box. The whole process took 3 days and a little over $200 in notary fees. I never mentioned it again. For the next 6 years, I worked like any other employee. Early mornings, late nights, chasing deadlines, building trust. My department saved Apex millions by identifying waste in supplier contracts. I got awards, promotions, and polite applause at company town halls. They called me the watchdog. I wore it like a badge of honor. Then came Patricia Hale. She joined as CFO in 2020, fresh from a tech startup acquisition that regulators later investigated for accounting irregularities. Jason arrived with her so-called operations specialist, though everyone knew he was her enforcer. They talked a big game about streamlining operations and increasing liquidity. Translation: cut oversight, move faster, ask fewer questions. The first year under Patricia felt different. She was charming at first. Compliments in meetings, invitations to high-level briefings. But it changed the moment I questioned a $9.4 million consulting retainer paid to a newly formed vendor in Delaware. She froze me out overnight. By early 2023, people in my department started disappearing. Resignations, sudden transfers, burnout. And yet, the vendor list kept growing. That's when my instincts, honed by years of compliance work, started screaming. I began my investigation quietly, after hours, using mirrored backups of the finance system. The deeper I looked, the uglier it became. 3 shell companies, identical invoice templates. Payment authorizations signed within minutes of submission, always by Patricia. She'd built a hidden siphon. When I reported it to the internal audit committee in September, I thought Apex would do the right thing. Instead, I was escorted out of my own office, pending a compliance review. They tried to isolate me. Calls unanswered. System access suspended. HR performance evaluations appearing in my inbox like clockwork. That's when I knew it was time. I drafted the integrity escalation letter. Simple, factual, and devastating. Attached every document, email, and transaction trace. I mailed it certified to Westlake Trust Services, copied my attorney, and submitted the internal report. I even recorded a short video on my phone, time-stamped, explaining the retaliation sequence just in case something happened to me. When Jason called me into that conference room 2 weeks later, I already knew the outcome. I'd prepared for that exact moment since 2018. What they thought was humiliation was, legally, a trigger condition. The irony? The clause they ignored wasn't even hidden. It had been part of my digital HR file for 6 years. No one ever bothered to read it. After the meeting ended, I walked straight to the parking lot. The November air bit at my face, but I felt strangely calm. I sat in my car, exhaled, and whispered, "It's done." My phone buzzed, an email from Westlake confirming verification under review. I stared at it for a long minute. Part of me still couldn't believe it was real. But it was. I had followed every protocol, filed every report, and documented every act of retaliation. They had walked straight into the trap, one I'd built patiently, ethically, and completely within the law. Edward's voice echoed in my memory. Paperwork wins wars. This wasn't just a win. It was justice. Signed, sealed, and escrowed. I turned the key in the ignition and drove away, my heart steady for the first time in months. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. Apex Systems had just declared war on the wrong person, and I was ready for every move they'd make. By the next morning, the silence was deafening. No congratulatory emails, no angry calls, just quiet. That's how corporations respond when they're cornered. Pretend nothing's happening. Hope it blows over. But I'd been through this before. When people are desperate, they get sloppy. At 8:43 a.m., I received a system notification. Access to Apex Compliance Network temporarily suspended due to administrative updates. There it was, the first official retaliation, neatly time-stamped for my records. By 10:15, my name was removed from the executive email group. At 11 o'clock, my office badge failed at the elevator, and security told me my clearance level was being reviewed. I smiled. Each of those acts, every digital door closed behind me, was one more nail in their own coffin. Still, I couldn't let my guard down. Apex had a reputation for playing dirty. I knew they'd try to discredit me, maybe even intimidate me into signing a resignation agreement. So I did what the Army veterans I used to work with called prepping the perimeter. I went home early that day and backed up everything. Emails, system logs, message threads, audit files, all encrypted and uploaded to an independent server my attorney controlled. I made 3 copies, one for him, one for my sister in Chicago, and one locked in a hard drive at a storage unit under my maiden name. You don't survive in compliance work by being careless. That night, I barely slept. I replayed the meeting in my head. The look on Jason's face when Westlake confirmed the payout. The disbelief. The fear. But beneath that, there was something else. Anger. He wasn't just worried about the money, he was scared of what I knew. The next morning proved me right. At 7:12 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. When I picked up, a woman's voice said, "Amanda? This is Special Agent Karen Moss, FBI Financial Crimes Division. Do you have a moment?" The words froze me for a second. "Of course," I said. She continued, "We received documentation from Westlake Trust Services regarding your integrity clause and related financial irregularities. We'd like to schedule a meeting to review the evidence you've gathered." I felt my pulse quicken. They'd taken it seriously. "Absolutely. I can be available anytime," she paused. "And Amanda? Don't tell anyone at Apex we've contacted you." When we ended the call, I sat staring at my coffee for nearly 10 minutes. The fraud I'd uncovered wasn't just corporate misconduct. It was federal-level crime. And now, I was the key witness. By Friday, the company shifted from silence to full-scale containment. Jason called me into HR again. He'd dropped the fake politeness this time. "Amanda, you need to return all company property immediately. Laptops, keycards, files, everything." I placed them neatly on the table. "All here," I said. "You might want to check your legal department before deleting anything. Some of those systems are under federal review." He blinked. "Federal review? I assume you've spoken to your lawyer?" I said, keeping my tone even. He didn't answer. Instead, Claire, the HR director, handed me a new paper. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. It's standard procedure during transition. I scanned it. 18 pages. Clauses about non-disparagement, confidential information, and one paragraph that practically screamed, 'Don't talk to law enforcement.'" I slid it back. "You can keep this." Jason leaned forward, voice sharp. "You're making a mistake, Amanda. Apex is a powerful company. You don't want to be on the wrong side of this." That line almost made me laugh. "Jason," I said softly, "you already put me on the wrong side when you demoted me. The rest is just paperwork catching up." He slammed his pen on the table. "You think you've won something?" "I don't think," I replied. "I document." That afternoon, I met Agent Moss and her team at a small field office downtown. No suits, no drama, just professionals who knew what they were looking for. I handed them the encrypted drive and my full 62-page report. Moss read the executive summary silently, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up. "You realize this connects to 2 other cases we've been building?" I raised an eyebrow. "Defense contracting?" She nodded. "Same structure. Fake vendors, Delaware registrations, rapid payouts, always signed off by the same CFOS moving between companies. Your report ties them together." For the first time, I felt the weight of what I'd stumbled into. This wasn't about Apex anymore. It was a network, a pattern. Patricia Hale was just one node in a much larger scheme. Moss continued, "We'll need your cooperation. There may be subpoenas, interviews, depositions. You'll have protection under federal whistleblower statutes." "I'm not afraid," I said, and I meant it. As I left the office, the November sky was darkening. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, watching the city lights flicker on. Somewhere in one of those glass towers, Jason and Patricia were scrambling, trying to figure out how to contain a storm that had already passed over them. The payout clause might have hurt them financially, but what was coming next would destroy their entire operation. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. The kind you only get when you stop surviving and start fighting back. I wasn't just a compliance officer anymore. I was a witness, a trigger, and a storm they'd never seen coming. And the next phase was already in motion. The following Monday began like any other. Coffee, cold wind, and the sound of my phone buzzing nonstop. Except this time, the calls weren't from Apex. They were from reporters. The first voicemail was from a journalist at the Financial Tribune. Ms. Lewis, we're investigating allegations of procurement fraud at Apex Systems. We understand you filed the initial report. Would you be willing to comment? I froze. The FBI had promised confidentiality during the preliminary stage. If the media knew, it meant one thing. The investigation had gone public. I opened my laptop. There it was, front page news. Federal investigation targets Apex Systems, CFO and senior executives accused of multi-million-dollar fraud. Patricia Hale's smiling photo sat beside a headline that made my stomach twist. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was a strange, hollow calm. Years of suppressed truth had finally surfaced, but the weight of it was real. The article detailed everything: fake vendors, inflated invoices, Delaware shell companies. Sources close to the matter confirmed the FBI raids on Apex headquarters over the weekend. Patricia was cooperating, which was corporate language for lawyered up. Jason wasn't mentioned by name, but I knew it was only a matter of time. By noon, my former coworkers began messaging me privately. Some were apologetic, others terrified. One text from a junior analyst stood out. They're cleaning house. Jason's office was emptied this morning. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. At 2 p.m., my attorney, Michael, called. They're going to come after you next, he said. I sighed. You mean reputationally? Exactly. Expect leaks, rumors, maybe claims you falsified evidence. Stay quiet. The FBI's case is strong, but Apex's legal team will try to muddy the water before indictments drop. He wasn't exaggerating. By evening, several blogs had published anonymous insider statements, suggesting my integrity report was motivated by personal grievances. They even dredged up my old divorce, claiming financial stress was my motive. It stung, but I'd expected it. Patricia's lawyers were experts in deflection. When cornered, people like her didn't fight the facts. They attacked the messenger. The next day, Agent Moss called. Don't engage with the press, she warned. We've obtained financial warrants. The Delaware bank accounts linked to Phantom Ridge and Lattice Consulting are frozen. Hale's passport has been flagged for flight risk. Any arrests yet? I asked. Soon, she said. We're finalizing the charges. Your documentation was airtight. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching the city lights blur into the water. For the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about my job. I wasn't thinking about deadlines or compliance reports or who might stab me in the back next quarter. I was free. But freedom felt complicated. Part of me wanted to celebrate, yet another part kept remembering the good people at Apex. The analysts, assistants, and engineers who'd done nothing wrong but would now lose their jobs because of others' greed. That guilt was hard to shake. 3 days later, I got an unexpected call from Claire, the HR director who'd been in the room when Jason demoted me. Her voice trembled. Amanda, they're saying the company's collapsing. The board just fired Patricia. Jason's gone. Half the executives are on administrative leave. What did you do? I almost laughed at the irony of that question. What did I do, Claire? I told the truth. There was a long pause. They're saying you walked away with $120 million. Is that true? It's not that simple, I said quietly. It wasn't their money. It was the compliance reserve, meant to protect whistleblowers. They just never thought anyone would use it. She exhaled shakily. Jason told us you were unstable, that you were sabotaging the company. I know what he said, I replied. That's how corruption works. It gaslights everyone around it. Her voice softened. For what it's worth, I'm glad you did what you did. Maybe now they'll stop pretending integrity is just a word on a poster. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window for a long time. I didn't look like someone who'd just won. I looked exhausted, like someone who'd been carrying a secret for too long. The next morning, the news exploded again. Apex CFO arrested in federal fraud probe. Multiple executives charged. The images were surreal. Patricia in handcuffs, escorted from her gated mansion. Jason's mugshot splashed across every news site. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, there was a quiet sadness. I'd spent years fighting for honesty, and now that truth had finally prevailed, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. Later that afternoon, Agent Moss called with one final update. The board has settled with the SEC. Apex will pay $240 million in fines and restitution. They're also dissolving the Defense Contracts Division. You won't need to testify publicly. They're using your documentation as the foundation for the prosecution. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I walked to my desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the original envelope, the notarized clause that had started it all. The seal was still intact. 6 years ago, I'd written it to protect my job. Instead, it became the blueprint for something bigger. A system that finally punished the people who thought they were untouchable. I placed it back in the drawer and whispered, one more phase left. Because even though the fraud had been exposed, my story wasn't over. Now it was time to decide what came next, how to turn this chaos into something meaningful. And that choice, I realized, would define everything that followed. 6 months later, I still woke up at 6 a.m. every day. Old habits die hard, even after you've walked away with a payout that could last 3 lifetimes. But my mornings looked different now. No rush hour traffic, no inbox full of urgent flags, no fake smiles in glass boardrooms. Just quiet. I'd bought a small house on Bainbridge Island, overlooking Puget Sound. Not a mansion, not a statement. Just peace. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch with coffee and watch the ferries drift by, thinking about how everything changed because of one signature on a document 6 years earlier. The $120 million transfer had gone through without a hitch. Westlake confirmed it, my attorney verified it, and Apex never got a cent back. They tried, of course, filed emergency motions in Delaware and Washington courts, but every ruling came down the same. The clause was valid, the conditions met, the payout legal. To the world, I was the woman who beat the system. To me, I was just someone who refused to stay silent. 2 months after the case broke, Agent Moss called again. We've wrapped up the broader investigation, she said. Patricia Hale pleaded guilty to wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. 22 years, no parole. Jason Cooper took a plea deal. 5 years and forfeiture of all assets. Apex settled with the government for $240 million. I remember sitting in my kitchen, staring out the window as she spoke. I didn't feel joy. I felt closure. The kind that's quiet, like exhaling after holding your breath for years. Then Moss added, the Bureau wants to debrief you for a case study. Your documentation process, your clause, set a new precedent for whistleblower protection in corporate environments. That surprised me. My clause, something I'd written in a moment of fear and foresight, had become a model for reform. So it worked, I said softly. It worked, she confirmed, because you planned it like a professional, not a victim. When we hung up, I thought about that word. Victim. I'd been called that by reporters, by lawyers, even by friends. But I never felt like one. I hadn't fought for revenge. I'd fought for accountability. By spring, I'd started something new, a consulting firm called Integrity First Solutions. It began small. Me, my laptop, and a rented office near the marina. I helped companies build internal fraud protections, real ones, not the empty HR buzzwords. Within months, demand exploded. CEOs, compliance teams, even government contractors reached out, asking me to review their systems. They didn't want another Apex. I hired 5 people, all former auditors or investigators burned by corporate politics. I told them the same thing during orientation. We don't just find fraud. We protect truth tellers, because every time someone stays silent, corruption grows stronger. One of my first clients was a defense contractor under new management after Apex's collapse. Their general counsel, an older man with kind eyes, shook my hand and said, "We read your case in the news. You made a lot of people rethink what integrity really means." That moment hit harder than any wire transfer. Of course, not everyone saw me as a hero. The business press loved their narrative. The whistleblower who cashed out. They made it sound like I'd orchestrated a corporate heist. Maybe that's what kept people watching. The idea that I'd beaten the rich at their own game. But the truth was simpler. I hadn't stolen anything. I'd just enforced a contract no one bothered to read. One night, I received an email from Claire, the former HR director. She'd resigned after the scandal and was now working at a small nonprofit. It read, "I used to think compliance was paperwork. Then I watched what happened to you. Thank you for proving that ethics can still mean something. You made me rethink what kind of leader I want to be." I reread her words 3 times. Then I smiled and finally deleted the last folder on my desktop labeled Apex. It felt like erasing a scar that had already healed. Life after Apex wasn't glamorous. It was honest. I spent my days helping others navigate the same systems that once tried to bury me. And in that work, I found something far more valuable than the payout. Purpose. One morning, I got a letter forwarded from my lawyer. It was from a woman in Texas, a mid-level accountant at a logistics firm. "Ms. Lewis," it said, "I watched your story. I found a fraud scheme at my company, and I was terrified to speak up. But after reading what you did, I documented everything and went to the board. They're investigating now. You gave me courage." That letter reminded me why I'd done it all. Because courage doesn't come from being fearless. It comes from being scared and doing it anyway. Sometimes I still think about that day in the conference room. The moment Jason signed my demotion letter, not realizing he detonated his own downfall. It's strange how something so small, a single signature, can alter so many lives. If I've learned anything, it's this. Integrity isn't a department or a slogan. It's a choice. One you make long before anyone's watching. People ask if I'd do it all again, knowing the stress, the loneliness, the public scrutiny. My answer is always the same. Yes, I tell them. Every single time. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't money or recognition. It's peace. The kind that comes when you know you did what was right, even when everyone told you not to. And that, more than any payout, is what I live with every morning when the sun hits the water and I whisper to myself, mission accomplished.